Well, everybody, it's been a great morning so far, and my next guest will only make it greater. So we're going to move and shift gears. A lot of you here are because of your influence or because you're in art or music or creativity, and you're also maybe into technology. But our next guest is literally recognized as one of the most premier and maybe pioneers of AI and generalized AI in the world, Ben Goertzel. He's also the CEO of Singularitynet. We're going to talk about the future of AI, DAOs, art, and music and everything in between. Ben, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Looking forward to our chat.
Yeah, so let's start folks off. You and I actually, the only time we've ever met other than this was more recently in Wyoming. I got my Wyoming hat on, but we were in Wyoming at the third annual Blockchain Stampede. I was moderating a panel you were part of with Charles Hoskinson and Draper. Charles will be here tomorrow, kicking off tomorrow. Draper kicked off today, as well as several other people. And we were under the government, we were wearing our masks doing a panel, and we were like 35 people in a room with 4,000 people on stream. And I didn't get to speak with you much other than what we said on the panel. And obviously I was just blown away. And I know we have a lot of common interest in where you're moving things with Singularity as it relates to Cardano and some of the other ecosystems that we share. But for those who don't know you, including me, at a level that maybe really understands how you got here, let's just start with, kind of your journey. Like, how did you get to CEO of Singularitynet? What was the evolution of that? And kind of how did you arrive here? And what's part of your ethos? What's helped shape that so that we can contextualize that for folks?
Yeah, so I mean, I started my career with a PhD in mathematics in the late 1980s, but I mean, shortly after that, I plunged into artificial intelligence research and development. And at that time, AI was more of a sort of out there blue sky sort of thing. It wasn't a major industry, and you got into AI not because it was a great way to make money or a trendy thing. You got into AI because you were like fundamentally interested in how intelligence works and in sort of the miraculous thing of bringing mind out of matter, right? I mean, so back then AI was a speculative and sort of a deep thinking type of endeavor. And I worked on sort of the theory of general intelligence for a while. Then late 90s, I left academia and where I'd been for 10 years and moved into industry and started building real world AI systems, doing, financial prediction, natural language processing, signal processing, genetics, data analysis. I mean, at that time, AI was starting to get real, right? In the practical sense, but also the difference between narrow AI that does highly specific things and general purpose AI that can think like people was becoming more and more clear. And most of this was nitty gritty businessy stuff, but there was since our theme here is related to arts and music, I'd say there was some of that all along. I mean, I remember would have been 2001, there was a contract using AI to generate basically background music for TV ads and so forth. So I mean, AI generated music was there. Probably one of my first published papers was genetic algorithms evolving fractals. So like AI just to generate really cool pictures, where the idea was you would have the AI specifically try to evolve new weird stuff it had never seen before. And I did a bunch of algorithmic music composition also. So like using AI algorithms to learn new melodies and riffs. You get a lot of stuff that sounded like the middle of Master of Puppets by Metallica or something.
Hey, one of my favorite songs. Yeah, it's a great song.
No, but the middle kind of goes on a long time with these chords. So AI is beautiful at that. It can go on forever, right? So,
yeah.
So I mean, where I got into blockchain and this blockchain-based platform for AI called Singularity that I'm running now. I mean, the seeds for this were really laid in the late 1990s when the internet came out, and it became clear that you could deploy a large-scale AI system in a way that wasn't like owned or controlled by any single party, right? And even back then, that seemed like a good thing. Like, I mean, my wife, who I've been with like 10 years now, she dug up online something I'd posted in 1995 saying that I was going to run for U.S. president on the Decentralization Party, right? And which,
Wow.
I mean, I was,
you were an OG. You are an OG.
Yeah, I mean, I must have been like 29 years old then or something. So it was like when I turned 35 and I'm old enough to be U.S. president, decentralization for all, right? So even then, like internet was beginning, you could see like internet is decentralized, but it should be even more decentralized than it is, right? And so
Yeah.
and I tried to build something that if I'd been a little more persistent would have ended up being like a decentralized smart contract framework, but it was so hard. We're using like Java 1.1. It was just so hard to do with computers and languages at that time. So I focused more on the AI side. But then, when Bitcoin came out, I thought, well, that's cool. But when Ethereum came out with the sort of the vision of this is a decentralized world computer, and I mean smart contracts, which are neither smart nor contracts, but they're like persistent scripts that can keep running and organizing in a secure, decentralized way with each other. When that came out, I'm like, well, this it's slow, it's awkward, it's ugly, but it's like the first real infrastructure toward a decentralized IT network, which I thought was incredibly cool. And so I talked to some friends who've been in the blockchain space. I'm like, well, this is we should do something here. Like this doesn't solve the problem of how to make AI smart. And I had other threads of development like the OpenCog project aimed at making general intelligence, but this solves the problem of how once you've made the AI smart, it's not owned or controlled by any like a monopolistic or oligopolistic party, which is really important. And it solves the problem of making sure that AI just it draws on a broad variety of participants as it develops, rather than like representing a monolithic vision. And so that's how Singularitynet started. But then, of course, while Ethereum gave us a great start, it never had all the properties we really wanted as a software platform. And it's a moving target. It's developing and improving. But when I saw the Cardano platform, I was like, well, that's fundamentally more interesting. I'd been a Haskell developer since 1993, like back before Haskell was trendy. Like it was the Gopher interpreter there before GHC, the modern Haskell compilers and stuff. So
yeah,
seeing people were building a blockchain on Haskell, or I mean on any like pure functional programming language where you could do formal verifiability of programs, and like, well, this makes a lot of sense. It's obvious. I don't know why they didn't do it that way in the first place. So now we've been looking at taking Singularitynet and our decentralized AI and sort of merging it with Cardano, and I think that's where you can get the real infrastructure for like a intelligent world computer, like a global brain, which brings together so many threads from my whole career and hopefully can empower a lot of people to do a lot of things as they participate in growing this global brain. I mean, including tech, but also including, music, art, social and anti-social media, and like all the rest of the crazy things that human beings like to do. Right?
So for the people that don't have, which is most of us, for the people that don't have a PhD in mathematics, I want to phrase this to you, but please correct it where I may be taking a liberty that's not accurate, right? Sure. So in layman's terms, when you talk about Haskell as a functional programming language versus something that's not a functional programming language, you said something there that I wanted to not just jump over, because I think it's really important for general understanding, which is you need to be able to verify stuff, right? Nothing can exist without trust. The marketplace can't exist without trust. Transactions can't happen without trust. And so when we talk about a digital trust layer or a world computer, and we talk about an AI, something that's going to ultimately make that smart and give it decisioning ability based on a set of whatever predetermined inputs and outputs, functional language or Haskell-based language allows it to be computationally verified or governed by math or code, as it were, whereas non-functional languages don't have that property. Is that taking too many liberties, or is that accurate?
Well, yeah, the term functional has a lot of different meanings, right? So I mean, in ordinary English, it means like it works, it functions. That's not actually what it means in terms of functional programming. So I mean, a mathematical function it's sort of like a mathematical machine that takes a certain input and gives a certain output. So it's like a closed component that transforms its input into its output.
Yep.
And the important thing in computer science terms is it doesn't have any side effects. Like it takes in its input, it spits out its output, and along the way, it's not messing with a lot of other stuff, right? And Haskell is like that. There's other languages that are like that. I mean, ML and OCaml are like that. Idris that I'm working with is like that. The most commonly used programming languages like Java, Python, C++, the languages that most developers use, those are not purely functional in that sense. So if you make a program that takes some data and gives some output, along the way, it could be messing unpredictably with other random things in your computer's memory, right? And I mean, that in some ways makes it easier to develop some things. It's also like why your Windows machine crashes all the time and so forth. So if you want a program that behaves in a very predictable way, having a program that is just composed of components, each of which takes its inputs into its outputs and doesn't do other random shit along the way. I mean, a program that's composed of these sort of modular function components, it's easy to understand what it's going to do, and it's easy to mathematically model. So what happens is when you have a program defined in a functional language that's made of these little modules that just map input to output with no side effects, then you can formalize in simple equations like what the program does. And then you can have an AI that knows how to do math, like do a math proof, almost like you did in high school geometry class, right? The AI can do a math proof showing that the program actually does what it's supposed to do, right?
And that was a beautiful, actually, I appreciate that, because I actually just learned a bunch, and I know other people probably did. That's a beautiful explanation of the difference. And I think you could easily extrapolate, if you're listening to this, you could easily extrapolate why, when you're talking about your blockchain or your decentralized system, that you're building all these layers on top of, why knowing what's going to happen every time at a small scale really matters, because these exponential spillouts or exhausts that you're talking about.
So if you look in Wall Street, like Jane Street Capital or Shaw, I mean, there's a number of cutting edge hedge funds that use functional languages for their quantitative trading systems for similar reasons. Like you'd rather not find out your trading system was doing a different logic than you wanted it to. You'd rather it not leak money along the way, right? So for the same reasons that the best and brightest in Wall Street are moving toward these functional programming languages, it totally makes sense for that to be how the guts of a blockchain works, right? Because even more so, because in a bank you can work around having a shitty programming infrastructure by just paying a bunch of people in a centralized way to keep checking everything. But you have a decentralized network. I mean, you don't have as much avenue to work around shortcomings in your software with money and humans, right? You just want the software to actually function as specified in the decentralized network. So it's pretty insane that every blockchain doesn't use a functional language. But I think the reason for it is clear. Until quite recently, it was just much slower to use this kind of language. Like you could make programs run faster and using less memory by using imperative languages, different kinds of programming languages. And
I would also think, and it's intuitive, doesn't mean I'm even closely right mathematically, but I think it's just harder. You got to be smarter, and I'm not taking anything away from developers, but it's easier to learn a Java or a PHP than it would be.
I mean, I think I'm not sure if it fundamentally is, or if it's just that the tooling is better and more mature now. Because I mean, in the end, the imperative languages are all wrappers around. It's all wrappers around assembly language programming, like pushing zeros and ones around in the memory. And we've just come up with development environments and visualization tools and tutorials, and there's a lot of machinery around the currently popular programming languages, and that's just beginning regarding functional programming languages, just because they hadn't been that practical until more recently because of processing time issues. But yeah, the story, it certainly runs deep, because like the whole von Neumann hardware architecture that we have now is well suited for imperative languages. Like if hardware development had gone a different way, you could have chips that were specialized for Haskell and Idris, and then those languages might be faster than C++ or Java. Right. And we're going to see that, right? Because what you would need there, you would need graph on a chip. So a graph in the sense of like dots with lines between them, right? If you have a chip where graph manipulation instead of number manipulation is the core thing on the chip. So it's like now on a typical chip, everything bounds down to plus, minus, times, and divides, right?
Right.
But it doesn't have to be that way. You could make a chip where everything boils down to, adding or removing links from a node and link graph, or looking for a connectivity pattern in a graph. So if you have graph on a chip, then all of a sudden Haskell and Idris are faster than C++ or Java. We could have started on that route in the 50s, right? But we didn't. Just like we could have started with massive parallel computing in the 50s. Instead, we started with like single CPU, and they're just now making things parallel. So I mean, right now, indeed, it's easier for a newbie programmer to approach imperative languages like Python, say, which have a lot of side effects in executing their functions, than for a newbie developer to approach Haskell. And I mean, if you're doing like, computer art or computer music or something, doing that in Haskell involves some abstract math thinking, whereas writing a Python script is you teach that in elementary school now.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that'll be the case 5 years from now. I mean, I think the tooling will evolve to make functional languages just as easy or easier than the Pythons and
this is a good segue. This is a good segue, right? And you're giving us kind of the underpinning. How do we get here and why? But here's the segue that I'll throw out to you, because I want to shift gears into your DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization, your thoughts around that, your thoughts about how AI, both narrow and or general, play into those kind of things. And then culture, because a recurring theme, and again, call it a bias, but when I look back and I layman turn it out, I go, culture has always preceded tech, right? In one way. So if you look at Silicon Valley or Tel Aviv, these really robust, dense technology ecosystems, I always say you had Haight-Ashbury before you had Silicon Valley, right? Now, whether those two things that were coupled at the time or not in people's minds or consciousness, the reality is that social cultural revolutions have typically preset the road for whatever technology is then deployed next at scale. And I think if we believe that, or if we don't believe that, that could be a debate. But if you look at the social cultural revolution that's happening right now, this move towards Web3 from Web2, right? We had a readable web, then we had a read and write web, and now we have an executable web, and it's in the early days. But the demand curve and the hive mind of smart people, creatives, thinking, young people, a whole generation of 80 million strong just in this country alone, let alone 2 billion under 20 in Africa, moving in the direction of decentralized systems, cryptocurrencies, that kind of thing. You could say the social cultural pull is going to almost put force mechanisms into the market, right, around technology, whether it be hardware or software kind of choices, that could lead us in 5 years to something where, like you said, hardware is now a graph-based chip versus that, simply because the thing that people want will be better received with speed into a different direction and certainty. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I'd like to move into a conversation around what is Singularitynet doing and how will it enable social networks that are decentrally autonomous organizations, the music and art proliferation, a renaissance proliferation in a way that is more equitable between fans and artists and everything in between. What is your guys' stake in the ground that you're doing? What is the infrastructure doing Talk about your roadmap and kind of your viewpoint on where we need to go and how you're helping get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is multiple metrics, shitloads of different things to go into, right? So yeah, but I will try to go over what we're doing in general in a way that's sort of biased toward creativity in the arts and culture, which is sort of the theme that you're hitting on here. And yeah, I definitely agree with the observation you made, which has been made before, that the massive technological creativity, I mean, that typically comes out of an environment that has a broader based creativity, including artistic, literary, cultural, and all the rest. I mean, I lived a bunch of my life in New York City, and that's a perfect example of that. You just got all sorts of art, music, literature, film, Wall Street, but like everything is there in Manhattan, which is a crazy mixing pot. And Hong Kong, where I lived for 9 years, is a lot like that. Like everyone's passing through Hong Kong. There's all sorts of crazy stuff happening. In Beijing, where I spent a lot of time, is the same way. Like 798 district is probably the best art district on the planet. But you also have like China's Silicon Valley within Beijing, right? And so Silicon Valley is sort of the example that pops in Americans' minds first when you think about this, because you have like the whole San Francisco art scene, and Beans in the park, and then you have Apple and all the different tech companies there. But that's a general phenomenon, and it is interestingly a phenomenon that's bubbling up in a decentralized way across the whole internet now, in a sense, with the interpenetration of different online communities for art and music, and social media with online communities for like open source code development and so forth. So in terms of Singularitynet and how we're contributing to all that, I mean, Singularitynet is trying to build one piece in the tech stack underlying what we're looking at is an emerging decentralized global brain, but then we're also trying to help aggregate a community that can go beyond that one piece and help with that, with building and promoting a lot of other stuff. So I mean, the technical piece that Singularitynet is building is basically a protocol for multiple AI agents to communicate and coordinate with each other. And that can take the form of a marketplace where an AI agent is providing services to a customer who wants AI services. It could take the form of multiple AIs just cooperating together to solve problems that none of them could solve on their own. It can take the form of AIs, producing new AIs to meet specifications that other AIs or people gave to them. But it's sort of a communication fabric aimed at getting services from AIs, providing services to AIs, and AIs cooperating and collaborating, right? And so that's part of a stack. So the OpenCog artificial general intelligence system that I'm also working on with the team, that's what I think of as Singularitynet layer 2. Like that lives on top of Singularitynet. And Singularity DAO, which is a decentralized finance platform I'm working on, that also lives on top of Singularitynet, using Singularitynet for financial prediction risk management. Something called Sophia Collective I'm working on with my friends at Hanson Robotics. This is actually aimed at, initially visual art, but also, robotics and robotic characters as a form of art and music. And this is a sort of arts collective centered around the Sophia robot, and which is also building on top of the Singularitynet platform. But then below the Singularitynet platform, you need a blockchain, right? And this is where our port from Ethereum to Cardano is important, because Cardano, with its functional programming infrastructure, I think will let Singularitynet run both faster and cheaper, and also in a more intelligent way, where the agents understand more about what each other are doing. But there's other infrastructure technologies too. So I've been working some with Elastos platform recently. I mean, Elastos is trying to build Web3, like a decentralized web. And I think there's very interesting ways Elastos can interoperate with Cardano. I mean, my friend Tufi Saliba and Dan Tolliver have a system called Toda IP, which is like a super efficient decentralized protocol that doesn't have any ledger, right? So I think Cardano is extremely important technology. There's some other things like Elastos and Toda that give important ingredients. You know, Singularitynet is important, but we need a lot of things running on top of it that leverage, that provide AI agents to this decentralized agent network. And on the whole, what we're seeing is we need in the next few years to build a whole decentralized technology stack that does everything the tech stacks of Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba do, and do more than that, and do it in a purely decentralized way that no one owns and controls. And that's really, really hard from a technology view. I'm happy I don't have to solve it myself when you have folks like Charles Hoskinson and the Cardano team, like, who have solved big pieces of it. But, you know, the benefit you get from that is you get software that does amazing things and that people can use in, you know, an endless number of imaginative and creative ways, like following their own passion and motivation and imagination, rather than going in the narrow channels that are laid out for them by big tech companies and their specific business models, or by governments and their specific interests in terms of maintaining their own power and controlling their populations, right? Like the internet and Linux are the two shining examples, right? These are decentralized networks. They're not owned or controlled by any one party. They have revolutionized the world and continue to do so. And you need AI, finance, medicine. You need these things. And you need arts. You need all these things to be more like the internet or Linux than to be like governments or monolithic.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, the simple analogy would be, you know, running water, right? You can't live without water. And so you want water to be available to everybody, regardless of how wealthy they are or not. Now, certain people obviously can afford more expensive bottled water now, but, you know, the bottom line is water, air, cognition. We're all innately born with organic cognition. Some of us have more than the next person, but we all have it, whether we deploy it or not. It's a different story, but we all have it. But then there's silicon cognition. And right now, silicon cognition in all its forms, narrow or generalized AI, is kind of in these walled gardens too, because that's where the R&D spend has been. You're kind of fighting this battle of, you know, the rebellion of like open, right? And a platform that can scale big enough, bad enough, where the AI agents that are on that are not all built by you. Maybe the majority of them will not be built by Singularity.
The vast majority shouldn't, just like the vast majority of, you know, dApps running on Cardano are not going to be built by IHK or Emergo or whatever, right? I mean, that's the nature of building meta platforms. I think of it. I mean, you're building a platform on which others should build platforms, right? So Cardano is a platform. We're building Singularitynet platform on there. Then we're building, say, OpenCog platform on top of Singularitynet platforms. So you have meta platforms within meta platforms within meta platforms.
And that becomes
decentralized.
Yeah, so, you know, SDK is building a meta platform on top of Cardano and parallel.
Yeah.
So then the question becomes, right? So then the question CEO to CEO becomes, how do we expose each other efficiently? Like, what are the tool sets that will, because this is more your brain than would be mine. My brain can know how to bring the users, the masses, the kind of commercialization, the go-to-market partners to that side of the equation, which is important input as well. But because that's the participants, right? That's the community that ultimately fragments into multiple communities that are also going to provide themselves. But from a technology standpoint, there's a math equation there of just like everything, where you figure out how does a platform built on top of a platform called Cardano or whatever communicate and understand what's available by a Singularity platform that's parallel to it, doing a lot of layer 2, 3, 4, and 5 stuff. How does that get built, right? Like, how's the brain that you're building help?
Yeah, so this is actually something that I've been working on a lot in the last month or so, together with with IOHK and with a bunch of other folks in Singularitynet. So our initial entry into the sort of question you're talking about is something we're thinking of an AI DSL, an AI description language, which actually Charles and I were talking about in the same get together in Wyoming, where you and I met at first. And Charles said, because you have Marlowe, which is a domain-specific language for finance built on top of elements of Plutus in the Cardano ecosystem. And Charles was like, well, we need a domain-specific language for AI, like for finance. And actually, I thought that was a good idea, but in the end, it has to be a very different sort of thing, because you have frameworks like TensorFlow and Torch, which already are, so in essence, they're domain-specific languages for AI. I mean, they're systems of libraries to use in Python and whatnot, but they serve the same function. So that's already there. On the other hand, what we didn't have, and we're now building, is a language for multiple AIs that are running in a decentralized platform to describe to each other what they're doing and what are the constraints on what they're doing. So you need one AI to be able to tell to another AI, like, this is the kind of problem I can solve. This is the kind of data I can use. This is how much resources I'll use to solve a problem of this size in terms of time, processing, money, and so forth. Like, this is the sense in which my analysis of this data set will be fair and balanced. Let's say this is the sense in which I can formally verify that what I'm doing is correct. So you need AIs to be able to describe their properties to other AIs according to a commonly agreed formal language. And then as we started to dig into this more, and we're working on this now together with Singularity, together with IOHK. I mean, as we started to dig into this, we realized, it's not just about AI. And in the end, it's a sort of dirty little secret, but Singularitynet isn't really just about AI either. It's just about software, right? I mean, we made this framework for a bunch of AI agents to communicate and coordinate. But I mean, if one of the agents isn't doing AI, but is doing something else, the same platform applies, right? It's really about multi-agent systems of software agents cooperating to do stuff. And the AI description language is really about software programs describing what they do to other software programs in a formal way so they can communicate and coordinate. So, I mean, as an example, we have a spin-off of Singularitynet called NewNet, which will probably release its own Cardano native asset sometime later this year if our current plan continues. So sometime after we port the Singularitynet AGI token to Cardano. But I mean, NewNet is about taking processing power, could be on your phone, on your laptop, on your brain chip plugin, or your Java toaster, like whatever it is, right? It's taking sort of ambient decentralized sources of processing power and tokenizing that so you can get some NewNet tokens for contributing your processing power to, processes that may be running Singularitynet AI agents. They could be running other Cardano dApps or whatever. But for this sort of decentralization and tokenization of processing power, you also want a formal language to describe, like, what is this AI doing? Like, what are its hardware requirements, what are its bandwidth, what are its data requirements, right? So that's another case where you want a formal language for AIs or any software process to be able to describe what they're doing, and you want the phone to be able to describe to the NewNet network, like, what's its availability, what's its processing constraints, how often is it online, right? So having a generic language for this agreed on by a decentralized community is an interesting thing. I mean, we're using the functional programming language Idris to do this now, which is sort of the next step beyond Haskell in terms of abstraction and sophistication. But you also need governance, right? You need like a decentralized mechanism for all the parties to agree on an ontology to use to describe data types and task types, and to agree on updates to the language and so forth. So it becomes a mix of a tech problem and a decentralized governance problem. And that brings us to another interesting thing I've found with cooperation with the Cardano ecosystem is there's been a big focus in Cardano on decentralized governance, and we're planning to leverage that in a few ways. But there's the Voltaire and Catalyst program in Cardano, where you have community members vote with their tokens on which community proposed projects should be funded. So we're sort of cloning that into Singularitynet, right? So as we're starting in a couple months, we're going to be starting to launch each month a stream of new AGI tokens on the Cardano platform. But 30% of these newly released AGI tokens will be into a program similar to Voltaire, where AGI token holders with the Singularitynet AGI token will vote on which community projects get funded. And this decentralized governance, I think, is extremely important. I mean, it's different than the decentralized governments underlying the AI DSL, but it all overlaps. And I mean, this ties into the arts and creativity aspect. So we have the Sophia Collective that I briefly mentioned, which is aimed at at NFTs, AI generated images and video, AI generated music, sort of with Sophia as a central brand concept, and the Sophia software, one of the tools used to generate cool art. But then within what we're calling the deep funding pool, the decentralized ecosystem projects pool, which is these 30% of newly released AGI tokens, I mean, it's not just for hardcore AI algorithms. It's not just for improvements to the infrastructure. I mean, it can be for like people creating AI agents running on Singularitynet on Cardano that generate amazing new music in
that's where I think there's such an interesting who knows what it's going to look like when it's souped, when it's turned into soup and whatever, but there's just such an interesting primordial ooze, I think, that's happening as it relates to this, because on our side, we're in alpha with something that's not disclosed yet, but that solves a lot of these pieces from the creative side. And from the governance side, similar model, where imagine something cool got developed out of Atlanta or out of Zimbabwe or out of some cultural area that is either known or unknown to the masses, but it gets deployed where there is a tokenization of that thing, whether it be an FT or whatever the version of it is. And as that's consumed, that 30%, 25%, somewhere in that neighborhood, similarly, is put into a governance model where now that actually improves or goes into the physical ecosystem. So the activity of a metaverse economy is actually tying
back to that's right. So
let me real world economy.
Let me describe one. So about arts and music, one project that some friends of mine here in Seattle area are working on. So they're using machine learning and some Singularitynet based machine learning. And this isn't launched yet, but it's just friends who are out here doing it. So I know about it. They're using machine learning to help enable like real-time jamming among musicians who are sitting in their houses in different places. So like if you have a rock band with musicians sitting in their living room in 4 different houses, which is often the case.
I want to meet these guys because so all this stuff, I want to meet these guys because I don't know this, but exactly what you're saying, to enable that, and then imagine in real time being able to publish an album or whatever, and then that's
so that's it, right? So you want to enable real-time jamming, and you need machine learning to help overcome the lag of the internet. But then also, with all this real-time jamming happening through your system, you're gathering all the data of everyone playing music. That data should be owned and controlled by the musicians, stored in a secure way. But that data can then be used to train machine learning models. So like if I'm using this system for real-time jamming, right? I mean, then as well as getting that service, I'm building up a data set of me, and then there can be another AI agent that's running a machine learning model to play music like me, right? And then if I'm good and the AI is good, I can then basically send that digital version of me out there. And when someone else wants to jam, like if they're missing a keyboardist, they can get like the virtual Ben to come in as a keyboardist into their band. The virtual Ben. So then if they release their music out there and they're getting tokens for selling their music, the virtual Ben, which was trained based on me, can get some of those tokens, and then I'm monetizing my data by monetizing the machine learning based musician that was trained based on me. And then you can DeFi the whole thing also, right? Like you could have prediction markets on musicians, right? So I mean, if someone thinks that like my bizarre twisted keyboard stylings are gonna catch on, I mean, they could stake some tokens on that, so that if I end up being really successful, then they're making money. And you could actually build a whole like yield farming and DeFi ecosystem.
You could DeFi it. You could also, I mean, it just goes on and on. I want to keep vamping on this because it's super relevant to a lot of the people in the audience here, and also just some of the design thinking that we want to put around this and these inputs. So I see us in Singularity probably colliding a lot more on a functional level moving forward. But to not only can you DeFi that piece and kind of almost reinvent music publishing.
I mean, you need a new business. Music is really fucked, right? You need, I mean, music is great to listen to. There's amazing musicians out there putting so much stuff on Bandcamp and everywhere else, but the business model for music is horrendously fucked, right? I mean, Spotify doesn't pay people anything, and live performance is dead, so there's no way to make money with music. And I mean, you're not going to roll back BitTorrent and so forth. But if you can monetize fandom by, transforming the excitement of music fans into like token pumping activity for tokens corresponding to their favorite musicians, I mean, then you're monetizing fan enthusiasm, which I think tokenomics is ideally suited for. I mean, of course, you need not to pay $100 in gas every time you upvote your favorite.
Well, and that's where Cardano.
I mean, you need a real blockchain infrastructure like Cardano, and you need machine learning to help sift through all the noise. So I mean, there's a lot of pieces there, but I mean, I think you can see them all converging together in a beautiful way in the near future.
And you can see communities be able to be authentic, support that through their authentic. Like you said, if somebody thinks it's going to take off, they can stake against it. It's not a bet; it's a passion project, and it may materially been off. You can reinvent street teams, which are a big thing, obviously, with the hip hop culture in the '90s. Our CMO actually, was part of founding, street teams and that kind of thing. And
then we need VR breakdancing. We got to go.
But the thing is it comes back to a decentralized ID that allows you to know who's participating in that, a native way to distribute the rewards on a pro rata basis. And
Cardano is building or has built all this plumbing, and there's going to be a lot of cool stuff launched in the near future in that regard, I'd imagine.
Yeah. So I have one last question for you that ties this all together, but I really want to hear what your response or answer to this is, because as I'm listening to you, Ben, one of the things that jumps out at me is this question. And that question is, there's a lot of cooperation that we have to program, design, be thoughtful around as it relates to software, communicating, cooperating with other software, agents cooperating with agents in a decentralized way. My question to you is this: assume we get there. Is that a faster path to human cooperation? Because part of me is wondering, one thing that we can at least predict or model out is how to make software talk to software. We can fundamentally do that math equation. When we do that, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now, or kind of this organic lift into it, what happens to human cooperation?
I think the answer there, my daughter, who's 23 years old now, she realized a while ago the best answer to every question is it depends, right? You'll never go wrong. And I think it really, the devil is in the details here, right? Because look at social networks. I mean, social networks, they provide a way to communicate with people all over the planet and share knowledge and insights. And depending on how they're architected, they can either serve to bring people together in an amazing way. Like they brought me together with geeks all over the world who want to build thinking machines who I would have never met if we didn't have the internet and social media. On the other hand, they can also be incredibly divisive and polarizing, and they can be tuned to be polarizing, right? And I think the same is true, on the more sophisticated level of things like AI agent systems. Like you could design an agent system for multi-agent networks to cooperate with each other that will foster, nature red in tooth and claw type competition among parties and polarization and scamming and all sorts of nasty shit, or you could design that network in a way that fosters cooperation and collaboration, and that sort of comes down to doing it right. So I mean, what happened with social media is polarization emerged as a side effect of companies like Facebook just seeking eyeballs, because the easiest way to get engagement is to get people in these like
it comes to that business model, right? It's the incentives, isn't it? So it's when you design the technology can kind of connect, right, and allow for communication, but the incentives around the reward structure, i.e., the business model, is where the side effects that we don't want happen. So if we really think about this, it's kind of like a game theory equation as much as it is a plugging in of APIs, because what the incentive structures are and how sustainable they are kind of
right. But it's a self-organizing sort of feedback system, because if you have a decentralized network, then the incentive structures themselves are being revised and updated by democratic participatory activity of the network. So if you get in a positive trajectory, then the ecosystem is creating incentive structures for the ecosystem in a sort of holistic, unified, and positive way. If things are sort of perverse, then that decentralized ecosystem will create and refine its own incentive structures in a way that drives toward greater polarization and may split into multiple networks, each defining different incentive structures that will work toward their own like tribalistic goals, right? So it's because there's like in Facebook, there's Zuckerberg defining the incentive structures for everyone. In China's social credit system, there's CCP defining incentive structures for everyone. But in a decentralized network, there's everyone collectively defining the incentive structures for everyone, right? So you've got a self-organizing network that we are part of, right? I mean, Cardano is part of it, Singularitynet is part of it, and none of us can even architect the whole thing. We can do our bit to modulate the like self-architecting dynamics of the whole thing, which is quite subtle, and we barely have the right vocabularies to even talk about it. It's easier to talk about the software.
Right, that's what I was getting at, and I think by answering the question with it depends, but a really thorough line of new things to ponder, we've just uncovered that somebody who I know is way smarter than me and the average bird in computational strategy, but also has obviously a high IQ, an EQ, which I believe you have. Is going. We've got a lot of work to do, right? We've got to.
And nobody knows what the hell is going on, right?
We've got to just keep moving forward. Yeah. We've got to remember that humanity is our gift, and we design technology, and technology now can design itself. But the inputs that we have matter probably more than ever. The inputs that humanity.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things to keep in mind as technology accelerates and the world changes more and more each year, as we approach what I think really is going to be a technological singularity that we're already in the early stages of, is we have to become comfortable with our own radical ignorance, right? Because things are going to change faster than any of us can keep track of, or any small group of us or any company can keep track of. And we're going to keep dealing with the great unknown, and we're going to keep having to make the best judgments and assessments we can, in spite of not really knowing how good they are, because we know things are going to change in all sorts of ways that appear random to us before we get halfway through executing the plans that we've now made. And that I mean, that only highlights the need to make cooperation work, right? Because while we're all radically ignorant, we're a little less ignorant as a collective than individually. So I mean, if we can make collective understanding work, I mean, then we're going to do much better at confronting the radical unknown that will only get more and more radically unknowable as singularity approaches.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think, I tell people a lot, I remind myself of this, is one thing we'll know over the next 10 to 20 years is that we're alive, because we will be feeling every emotion that you can feel as a human if we're tuned into what's going on. So
maybe some new ones that you can't feel as a human.
Right. Maybe some new ones will emerge as well. Good point.
Yeah.
Ben, it's been awesome, man. It's a true pleasure. I know I speak on behalf of everybody at the Inevitable World Summit. Thank you for spending some time with us today. And we wish you the best. We'll be following your success as it continues to emerge.
Thanks a lot. Yeah. Fantastic conversation.